At my brother's merger party, he thought it'd be funny to introduce me like, this is my sister, no real job, no future, just a manual laborer. Everyone, including our parents, laughed. I didn't flinch. I just smiled, lifted my glass and said, "Cheers, this is the last time any of you will see me." Then, I walked. The room went completely silent. I'm Shelby Vance, 28, standing in the shadows of a Chicago penthouse, watching my brother Adrian raise his glass. The room was celebrating the merger secured by the Eco Tower design. My design, he found me in the crowd and grinned. "To my sister Shelby," he announced, "who is still figuring out what she wants to be when she grows up. Maybe one day she will step off the construction site and get a real job." Everyone laughed. My parents clink-hecked their glasses. I stood perfectly still. They thought I was the failure. They had no idea I was the architect of their destruction. Before I tell you whose name was actually on the blueprints he was holding, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. I did not shatter the glass. I did not throw the champagne in Adrian's face. I set the crystal flute down on a passing waiter's tray, with a soft, deliberate click. The sound was the only punctuation I needed. I turned my back on the panoramic view of the skyline, on the $3,000 tuxedos, on my brother's winning smile. I walked toward the elevator. My mother called my name, her voice tight with that specific tone she used when she wanted me to fix a problem without making a scene. "Shelby, don't you dare," she hissed. I did not stop. I did not look back. The elevator doors slid shut, cutting off the laughter like a guillotine. The silence in the metal box was deafening, but it was also clarifying. I watched the numbers count down from the penthouse to the lobby, and with every floor the air became easier to breathe. Down on the street, the wind off Lake Michigan bit through my evening gown, sharp and cold. I walked past the line of black town cars and chauffeurs to the far corner of the valley lot. There was my truck. It was a 10-year-old Ford covered in job site dust, the bed filled with levels and hard hats. The valley looked relieved to get rid of it. I climbed into the cab. The smell of old coffee, sawdust and diesel instantly grounding me. I started the engine and drove away from the Gold Coast, heading south toward the industrial district where the rail work happened. As the city lights blurred past my window, I asked myself the question I knew everyone else would ask. Why did I stay for 6 years? Why did I let them treat me like a laborer while Adrian played the architect? Why did I take the disrespect, the erasure, the scraps? It wasn't weakness. That is what people get wrong about survivors of families like mine. They see a victim. They see someone trapped by fear or lack of options. But that is not what it was. I was trapped by an invisible chain of responsibility. For 6 years I had been operating under a debt that wasn't mine to pay. When my father's business almost collapsed 3 years ago, I didn't step in because I was desperate for their approval. I stepped in because I knew the physics of our lives better than they did. I knew that if I didn't hold the weight, the whole roof would come down on everyone's heads. I was the structural pillar. I was the load-bearing wall. I absorbed the stress, the late nights, the technical crises, and the financial terror so that they could live in their open concept fantasy where money just appeared and problems just vanished. I stayed because I thought holding them up was my duty. I thought being strong meant enduring the weight. But tonight, Adrian had made it clear. He didn't see a pillar. He saw a prop. He saw something to be used and then mocked for its utility. He thought he could insult the foundation and still live in the penthouse. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I realized then that I wasn't just quitting a job. I wasn't just leaving a party. By walking out that door, I was removing the structural integrity of their entire lives. They thought I was the failure because I was the one covered in dust. They didn't understand that the dust was the only thing holding the mortar together. I wasn't the failure. I was the only thing keeping them standing. And now I was gone. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just drove into the dark, feeling the massive, crushing weight lift off my shoulders and settle right where it belonged on them. 3 years ago, the only thing my father Zachary was building was a lawsuit. It was a massive OSHA violation on the riverfront project. The kind of negligence that ends careers and bankrupts companies. He was facing criminal charges and a financial hole so deep it looked like a grave. I was 25, 2 months away from finishing my master's at MIT. I had a full scholarship and a future that did not involve cleaning up my father's messes. But when he called me, weeping, begging, telling me the family legacy was about to turn to dust, I made a choice. I chose blood over logic. I dropped out. I packed my life into 2 suitcases and moved back to Chicago. For the next 18 months, I did not see the inside of a penthouse. I lived in a construction trailer that smelled of stale coffee and wet drywall. I was the one who fired the incompetent foreman Adrian had hired because they were his drinking buddies. I was the one who redid the load-bearing calculations by hand because Adrian had forgotten to account for wind share. I negotiated with the unions. I reorganized the supply chain and I corrected safety protocols that were borderline homicidal. By the time the riverfront project opened, I had saved the firm $2 million in fines and delays. $2 million. Adrian showed up for the ribbon cutting in a new suit, smiling for the cameras. I was in the back, covered in dust, holding the clipboard. I thought that earned me a seat at the table. I thought that paid my dues. But as I woke up the morning after the gala, staring at the ceiling of my studio apartment, I realized that my sacrifice hadn't bought me respect. It had only bought them time to figure out how to replace me. My phone began to vibrate against the nightstand. It wasn't an apology. It was an assault. The first text was from Adrian. "You embarrassed Dad last night. Grow up and answer your phone." The second was a voicemail from my mother, Cynthia. Her voice was tight, clipped, the tone she used when she was managing a crisis. "Shelby, we need to discuss the intellectual property rights for the Eco Tower. The investors are asking about the design attribution. We need you to come in today and sign the transfer paperwork. Stop being selfish. This merger is bigger than your ego." They didn't want me back. They wanted my signature. They knew the designs were legally mine, and they needed me to sign them away so they could sell the company without a hitch. Then came the leverage. A text from the site foreman, a good man named Miller, who had taught me more about architecture than any professor. He sent a screenshot of an email from Adrian. It was a termination notice for my entire crew. Adrian was threatening to fire the very people who built his reputation just to hurt me. I sat up. The sadness I expected to feel was absent. In its place was a cold, hard clarity. I opened LinkedIn. There was Adrian had posted a photo from the gala, a professional shot of the award-winning team. In the original photo, I had been standing on the far left. In the version Adrian posted, the image had been cropped. I was gone. Erased. He captioned it, "Visionary leadership requires bold action. Proud to lead this firm into the future." I looked at the photo. I looked at the empty space where I used to be. They didn't just want to steal my work. They wanted to delete my existence while keeping the profit I generated. They thought cropping me out of a photo would make me disappear. They forgot that I was the one who poured the foundation. And if you remove the foundation, the whole thing comes down. I didn't reply to the texts. I didn't call my mother back. I got out of bed, made a cup of black coffee, and walked over to my drafting table. I didn't need to scream. I needed a portfolio. I did not respond to the threats. I did not engage with the gaslighting. I treated their panic like background noise on a construction site. Loud, dangerous, but ultimately irrelevant to the job at hand. I put on my only tailored suit, the one I had bought for my master's defense before I dropped out. I took the hard drive containing the metadata, the original CAD files and the handwritten calculations from 3 years ago. I put them in my portfolio case. Then, I drove downtown past the site of the Eco Tower to the glass monolith. That housed the only firm in Chicago that scared my father. Zoe was a legend in this city. She didn't build buildings. She altered skylines. She was ruthless, brilliant, and she had been trying to buy out my father's firm for a decade just to dismantle it. I walked into her lobby without an appointment. I told the assistant, "Tell Zoe I have the windshare calculations for the riverfront project and tell her they are wrong." 5 minutes later, I was sitting in a corner office that cost more than my parents' house. Zoe didn't offer me water. She didn't smile. She sat behind a desk that looked like a slab of ice and waited. I didn't waste time with a resume. I opened my portfolio and laid the schematics on the glass. Not the ones Adrian had presented at the gala. The real ones. The ones with the correct load-bearing ratios. the ones dated 18 months ago. Zoe put on her glasses. She traced the lines with a manicured finger. She stopped at the structural core analysis. She looked at the date. Then she looked at me. Adrian submitted a revision to the city last week. She said, her voice cool. He reduced the steel reinforcement by 20% to cut costs. I know, I said. That is why I am here. If you build it his way, the torque from a winter gale will snap the spine of the building in 3 years. Zoe sat back. She took off her glasses. You are the one, she said softly. You are the one who fixed the grade slope on the Meridian site. You are the one who renegotiated the steel contracts. It wasn't a question. I am. Why? She asked. Why did you stay? Why did you let them pay you a foreman's wage for a partner's work? I started to give her the usual answer about loyalty, about family duty. But Zoe cut me off. She leaned forward, her eyes sharp. Do you know what functional fixedness is, Shelby? I shook my head. It is a cognitive bias, she said. If you use a hammer to pound nails every day for 10 years, your brain stops seeing it as a piece of metal and wood. It only sees a hammer. It literally cannot conceive that the hammer could be used as a paperweight or a door's stop or a weapon. Your family suffered from that. They saw you in a hard hat covered in dust fixing their mistakes. They became functionally fixed on your utility as a laborer. They couldn't see you as an architect, because they were addicted to your function as a fixer. They confused price with value. They thought because you were cheap, you were worth less. They didn't realize you were the most expensive asset they had. She tapped the blueprints. They didn't steal this because they are evil, though they are. They stole it because they genuinely believe they own you. They think you are the hammer. It was the first time anyone had explained my life to me without using the word love to justify the abuse. It was clinical. It was precise. It was the architecture of my erasure. I am not a hammer. I said no. Zoe smiled. And it was a dangerous, predatory smile. You are the architect who is going to help me bury them. You're hired. Senior project manager, double your current salary, and I want the equity rights to these designs. Done, I said. I walked out of her office with a job offer signed in wet ink. I wasn't shaking anymore. I took my phone out and saw 14 missed calls from Adrian. I didn't block him. I wanted him to be able to reach me when the ground started to shake. The glass walls of my new office at Zoe's firm offered a clear view of the city's skeleton. I could see the cranes, the steel girders, the arteries of traffic. I had been working there for 3 weeks. The salary was real. The respect was real. But I couldn't stop watching the progress on the eco tower. It was an itch in the back of my brain, a structural anomaly I couldn't ignore. I knew Adrian. I knew he was lazy, but I also knew he was cheap. The revision Zoe had mentioned, the 20% reduction in steel, kept playing on a loop in my mind. How did he get that approved? The city inspectors are tough. You can't just delete structural support without a new engineering sign-off. Bless you. Why? It was late on a Tuesday. The office was quiet, bathed in the blue light of monitors. I logged into the Chicago Department of Buildings portal. It is public record. Anyone can look up a permit if they have the parcel number. I typed it in. The file loaded slowly. Structural under schematics and year proof. PDF. I opened it. I zoomed in on the foundational strata. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the layout I had finalized 6 months ago. It was an early draft. Draft 4. I remembered it vividly because it was the draft where I had miscalculated the lateral wind load for a 100 red-to-year storm. It was the draft that would sway too much. It was the draft where the concrete would crack, then spall, and then under the right pressure shear off completely. I had thrown this draft in the trash a year ago. I had explicitly told Adrian, this version kills people. Why did he submit this one? Because draft 4 used cheaper materials. It didn't require the expensive cross-bracing I had added in draft 5. It saved them $3 million in raw steel. My hands were cold. I scrolled down. If they submitted a flawed design, they needed an engineer to certify it. They needed a professional engineer stamp to take the liability. Adrian wasn't a P. My father's license had lapsed years ago. I reached the bottom right corner of the digital blueprint. I stopped breathing. There was the circular ink stamp. Shelby Vance, professional engineer, license number 04921, and across it a signature in blue ink. My signature. The room seemed to tilt. I didn't sign this. I had never stamped draft 4. I had locked my stamp in the safe at my parents' office before I left. The realization hit me with the force of a wrecking ball. They didn't just steal my work to get the merger. That would have been simple greed. This was something darker. They knew the building was dangerous. They knew the wind shear would tear it apart. They wanted the money from the cheap materials, but they couldn't risk the liability. So, they forged my signature. If that tower went up, and if when it came down, Adrian wouldn't go to prison. Zachary wouldn't go to prison. I would. I was the engineer of record. They were setting me up to be the architect of a catastrophe. They were willing to bury me under the rubble of their own greed. I closed the laptop. The fear evaporated, replaced by a rage so cold it burned. They wanted a fall guy. Instead, they just handed me the weapon I needed to execute them. The wind whipped off Lake Michigan as I stood at the back of the event tent, watching my family celebrate a project built on lies. My father charmed the mayor. My mother pined for investors, and my brother Adrian stood at the podium, clutching a gold shovel, selling a fantasy he had no right to claim. Beside me, Zoe and Inspector Davis carried the truth, forged documents, falsified safety reports, and proof that Adrian had stolen my engineering stamp. When we walked down the aisle, the crowd fell silent. Adrian mocked me, but his confidence cracked when Davis announced the site was now a crime scene. I revealed the forged blueprint bearing my name and the simulation showing the tower's catastrophic collapse. Investors fled. Officers stepped forward. Adrian dropped the shovel. In the aftermath, audits exposed a decade of corruption. My father lost his license. My mother begged for help I would never give. And Adrian now awaits trial. I moved on. In my new office as a partner at Zoe's firm, I overlooked the empty lot where their empire fell and the rising frame of my own project, the Meridian Spire. I cleaned my engineering stamp, no longer a weapon but a tool, and understood the truth. Justice isn't destroying someone. It's building something stronger beside the ruins they created. I didn't bury them. I simply stopped holding them.